Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited and happy to be introducing our speaker today, Alyes Wong. Alyes is a business manager of interpreting and translation services at UC San Francisco Health. She is certified in Cantonese by the Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters and is also qualified to interpret in Mandarin Chinese. She was awarded Interpreter of the Year in 2014 by the California Healthcare Interpreting Association. Alyes is actually returning home for this talk, where she grew up here on the windward side of Oahu. And she received her bachelor's degree in Asian Studies here at Manoa, certificate in Chinese. During her time here, she did 2 study abroad, so we can hear more about that later.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen.
I'm going to start with, can you tell me more about your work right now as a business manager?
Sure.
In the medical and interpreting services at UCSF?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. So currently, I'm the business manager at UCSF Health Interpreting and Translation Services. As Joe mentioned, I'm also a certified Cantonese interpreter, qualified to interpret for Mandarin. So business manager, that doesn't mean much, right? Does it? Well, what I do is I ensure that the processes of requesting an interpreter is going smoothly, and also working on improvement projects to improve language access. Just because you have policies around it at the hospital, it doesn't mean that's it. We have to continually make improvements to make sure our LEP patients, LEP means limited English proficient, the patients do have the access to the language that they need. So most of my work is to partner with different clinics and different initiatives at the hospital to work with them to create these ways for patients to access our services, and also to inform the different clinics and their providers on how to work with interpreters and patients with LEP. Why, you may ask? Well, UCSF is an academic institution. And so we always have new residents coming in, medical students coming in, and we need to help them understand how to work with patients with LEP and how to work with medical interpreters. It doesn't come easy, because the way that interpreting works is that the provider or the med student speaks maybe a few sentences, 2 or 3 sentences, and you have to pause so that the interpreter can interpret. And the patient can understand, and the patient responds, the interpreter interprets. And so there's a rhythm to it. And so it's something that med students need to practice, even residents need to practice. So every year we do these in-services with the different clinics, with the Department of Medicine, School of Medicine, to ensure that med students and residents know how to work with interpreters and patients with LEP. So that's the bulk of my work is to have these partnerships, and also to ensure that our interpreters are in a good working environment. I myself started as an interpreter, so 15 years, well, actually more than that now. There were things that were lacking in the department, workflows that weren't working, and so when I think back, okay, what is it that our interpreters need to have in order to succeed in their work? That's what me and my team, my management team, we work to make sure that our interpreters have all the resources that they need, and any questions they might have or any issues they might encounter, we want to help them solve it so that they can do the work that they do so well every day. So that's kind of what I do as a business manager.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, so you kind of started going towards that direction, but what do you find most rewarding of your job and the most challenging?
Wow. Most rewarding would be when we receive recognition, not for me, but for our interpreters, saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that the Spanish interpreter was here, because we were in a rush and we forgot to request an interpreter, but I'm so glad that you guys were able to come through." And just hearing that is just amazing. Even as an interpreter, when you see a patient and they're like, "Oh my gosh, it's you again. Thank you so much for coming." It's very rewarding to be recognized. In our work, we don't usually get recognized very much, because if the conversation is going well between the patient and the provider seamlessly, we're almost invisible as interpreters, because it's just these two parties talking to each other. But it's so nice to get recognized. And rewarding part, besides that, is also seeing how the improvement work that we do is working. That we see, oh yes, it is working, and how do we keep it working? Because somewhere down the line, it's going to break down, and we have to do some more improvement work. But when you see that it works, it's and after months of work to launch it, for example, we have a system. It's kind of like a dispatch system for our interpreters, and think of it as an Uber. We put in the providers put in a request, and it goes into a queue. Our interpreters have their own account. They can look at the queue for their language. They accept it, and they're off to that appointment. So this system works really well for us. But before that, it was paper and among paper. We get paged for requests, we get emails for requests, we get phone calls. Any way you can think of, short of a smoke signal, we were getting requests. And that's difficult because, it might be the same clinic asking for the same person. And so there's too many duplicates too. So once we were able to launch the system, it was so great to just not be able to depend on all this paper and phone calls to get a request. It all goes through the same way, the same system, streamlined. So that was one thing that was very rewarding for the whole department, and that we were able to reduce waste and provide our services more efficiently. And you mentioned challenges. Challenge is always going to be, we always, like I said, we have new residents and new med students every year. The challenge is to provide that education to them, to say, hey, this is how you work with an interpreter. This is how you work with a patient with LEP. The challenge there is because there's always continual education, quarterly, yearly. So that's one of the challenges that we have. Another one is acquiring the language that we need. For example, we have languages of lesser diffusion, meaning you may have a population of a certain community, but there's not enough interpreters for that community. So what do we do, right? So sometimes we have to think of creative ways. We have to see, okay, is there any interpreters out of state that can maybe do a phone call or a video call? So those are the challenges we face. How do we provide the languages that's needed? Yeah.
So Alice, I know you studied Chinese here at UH Manoa, and then where did this medical interpreting come in your career? And in what ways does your current position, whether a business manager or quality improvement service manager or medical interpreter, where did you, what kind of knowledge about the area of study that you do now? And then how does the East Asia part fit in with what you studied here in Asian studies?
Sure. So yes, I have my certificate in Chinese, and that was part of me finding out who I am, where I belong, because I wasn't born here in the US. And so growing up here, I have, my family, we speak Cantonese. And so, we're in that culture. And my parents, help us anchor us to that culture by having us speak Cantonese at home. Actually, it was a requirement. And it was fine because, we had interest in it because, parents were watching shows in that language. My brother and I watched cartoons in that language, right? And so as a kid, that grabbed your attention, right? And so we were able to keep that. But, also growing up here in Hawaii, you have this whole other culture and whole other friends who only speak English, right? And so you're kind of in between and you're trying to find yourself. And so part of, studying Asian studies was where, everybody says that, right? Where are my roots? Where do I come from? And so that missing piece was what, coming here and studying Asian studies about the history, it kind of helped me to anchor some of those things too. My parents can only tell me so much about history, right? And so that kind of solidified, okay, this is it giving me a better understanding, a whole understanding of where I came from. And so how does it relate to, medical interpreting? Well, being in this space where you don't, trying to find where you belong, it's it helps you to navigate and help you to have empathy for the patients that you work with, because some of them are older patients, and they have their plight, and through interpreting for them and their provider, you sometimes understand, oh, there's a reason why they're resistant to something that the doctor is asking about. And you have that knowledge because through Asian studies and all these histories, I learned that, okay, there's something there that I need to inform the provider about. That, hey, there's interpreter needs to pause the conversation and let you know about something. And so these pieces, even though when I was here, I'm like, how do this relate? But it does. Once you start, for me in medical interpreting, the history parts and just geographical parts also come into play. For example, you have traditional Chinese characters and you have simplified Chinese characters, right? And so it's not a one size fits all. There's always been if you talk about challenge, this is another challenge for interpreting. Why? Because when we do translations, which is written from one language to another, you translate. You can't just think that, because they speak Mandarin, it's going to be simplified characters, Chinese characters, right? You can't assume that. And so knowing that piece is so important, right? Because then you can explain to providers why you probably need to have both, because you don't know which one they might read. And some patients get offended if you send the wrong one, right? And it's very political, it's geographical. And so, we want to be, to provide equity to all our patients. And so we provide both. And sometimes we do give like a short history lesson, and the reason why I could do that is because I learned this in school, right? So I made that connection that, oh yes, it's because, there's history there that I need to impart to our providers about why we can't just, give one written script and not the other, or why do you have to do both, right? So all these little things kind of come into play. One of the, besides, being a medical interpreter, before that, I was doing other types of interpreting, and it helped me there too. For example, I was helping a athlete to come to the US from Shanghai for tournaments. And this athlete, she loves spicy food. She just loves it so much. It's Chinese spicy food, okay? And when you go into small towns in the US, sometimes you may not find that, right? You have so-called Chinese food, they call it chop suey. I don't know what that is either myself. And so she got frustrated. Why can't you find me a restaurant that serves spicy food? And I was like thinking, that's a good question. And then again, it kicked in that, oh yeah, because, the folks that immigrated to the US were mostly from Southern China. Southern China is not known for spicy foods. It's known for what? Dim sum. That's where I'm from. So my grandfather is from Canton, right? So, I know dim sum, we're known for our soups, our desserts, not quite for spicy food. So I had to give her a short lesson. Hey, I'll try my best, but we have to think about, how the Chinese community came to the US. And, because the people here who have restaurants weren't the ones who were making the spicy food. It helped a little, but I still had to find that food for her, right? But at least I was able to explain it, and so that she's not as, just frustrated with what was available. So even though, it was about food, but hey, it's still something that helped to kind of make those connections.
Yeah, that's a funny story. While you were here at UH, let's pivot a little bit and talk about your extracurricular activities. Mm-hmm. So I know besides academics, which you excelled in, what else did you do here?
So part of, again, trying to understand the Chinese culture better, is that after my first year at UH, I also went on a study abroad. I was for the summer to China with a whole bunch of other students. It was a great time. And that's where I think, when you study in a classroom, you learn one thing, right? You learn about history and all these things. but to actually be there and to interact with people there, and we went to Guilin, we went to Beijing, and to interact with them and see, oh, this is actually what I learned. Sometimes may not match, but also what I learned do match. And I think that experience kind of rounds out like what you learn in the classroom. To see the people, to understand the people there. So it was a great experience. Like just not just because we went to the schools, but also just experiencing going out on your own with your friend, not on your own, but with your friends, your classmates, and just experience that life. Makes a difference. It makes a difference, and it makes you realize, okay, I do want to learn more about what I just saw, what I just experienced on a study abroad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I didn't tell you this beforehand, but you can think back to the classes you took while you were here. Were there any particular classes that stood out to you in helping you in your professional career today?
That's a good question. I think definitely the history. For some reason, I do like history. So not just the history of China, but the history of Japan, the history of Korea. They all kind of connect in a way. After I learned, I'm like, oh yeah, they all have some sort of connection, and I love finding those connections. For me, language, like seeing those connections between these countries, for me is fascinating how they're connected. Definitely history, but also about how countries become modernized. That was another class, modernity, right? How do these countries become modernized? I think those were the classes that helped me, especially the language classes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the language classes in EL. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we have some students in the room and alumni, right? Undergrad and graduates. Do you have any particular recommendations that can help support students to become specialists of an area of East Asia or East Asia broadly that you can think of?
Definitely, if you have a chance to study abroad, you should. You definitely should. Because you only learn so much in a classroom. You really need to experience it to understand it better. So if you have a chance to study abroad, I think definitely do that. There was another, you talked about extracurricular activities earlier. I'm not sure if it's still around, but there used to be, do you remember there's a NICE program?
Mm-hmm. NICE is still around. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I also participated in that, just to make new friends, right? And help them, kind of navigate Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And so, join those programs, get to know other students from other countries. Mm-hmm. I think that's really, it helps you to broaden, your knowledge too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see some noddings. Everyone knows what NICE is. So we were conversation buddies for all the foreign students, and we did that for a part-time job. Alice, I know you didn't mention it, but you also studied abroad somewhere else.
Yes.
And it wasn't part of your Chinese studies.
It was not. I studied abroad in Japan, in Hiroshima, actually with you. Yes. So at my, the time here at UH, besides studying Mandarin, I also studied Japanese. And I feel I was just so blessed to be able to go on that study abroad. And it was another eye-opening trip. Because it was a year. It was a whole two semesters.
An academic year.
Yeah, academic year. And so to be immersed in a different university environment, that was really interesting. And I remember I took a class on Buddhism, and that was very interesting for me too, because I knew a certain it's called the Heart Sutra, and I knew how to recite it, but I didn't know the meaning of it. And so through this class, I learned that. And it was interesting because I know how to recite it in Cantonese, but this is Japanese, right? But the meaning is still there. And so that really stood out to me. And again, you meet people from all over the world when you're in a study abroad program. Mm-hmm. And you learn how to be independent too, right? You're away from your family right? But it helps you to kind of gain those skills to be independent, right? And you have to just know how to moderate yourself. Yeah, it was a very good experience for sure.
Yeah. So the next question is kind of twofold. So I'm going to ask about technical skills. So you could share with us 3 core technical skills do you think are most applicable for pursuing a career focused on East Asia? And the second part is specifically in medical interpreting here in the United States. And then what about personal qualities that you might find useful?
So technical skills. I think language skills is one of them. You don't have to be, I mean, I'm not saying that you have to learn a different language, but it's good to have a basic knowledge of it. And also technology, knowing how to, do certain computer work, because believe it or not, we're in that world, right? We're always it's never gonna go away. So it's good to have good, skills in computers and technology, especially if you're gonna work with, people in other countries, right? Critical thinking, that's another one. It's a good skill to have. And comprehension skills. And comprehension skills and reading skills. It sounds very basic, but actually those are very important. What was the other?
Personal qualities, and then about medical interpreting.
Oh, medical interpreting. Oh, okay. Comprehension is important for medical interpreting because you need to understand, not just what the patients are saying, but understand maybe there's something between the lines. So comprehending what they're saying and thinking about, am I missing something, right? So you need to know how to comprehend.
Sorry. For any personal qualities.
Personal qualities.
Okay. Applicable for pursuing a career.
Okay.
So medical interpreting.
Sure. Another thing I was thinking about is for interpreting is listening skills. Listening skills. Just because you hear the words coming out and they're going through, it doesn't mean you're understanding them sometimes, right? So to actually pause and think, okay, what did I just hear? And did I understand that? That's very important because, the patient might be telling you something very critical, and if you're zoning out, you're not going to get it, and you might make a mistake as an interpreter, and that could be very detrimental to the patient. So definitely hone those listening skills. Personal skills. I think interpersonal skills are very important because you want to develop a good rapport with your patients and your providers. We need to be professional, but we don't have to be cold, right? We can be, because in the healthcare setting, you have to be compassionate. And so I think those are the skills. Having compassion is another one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have just 2 questions left, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. What concrete recommendations would you give to current students or even students that are have graduated and they're considering pursuing further education? Who might be interested in a career focused or in a specific area of East Asia or focused in a specific place within, whether it's government or education or business, just like abroad, like some recommendation.
I think it's very similar to what I just mentioned, those technical skills, right? But also I think in order to pursue any work in East Asia or anywhere, is that you have to be willing to immerse yourself in that culture, right? The place that you want to work in or work with, the people you want to work with. You have to be open to embrace that. And again, there's only so much you can learn from a book, right? You need to actually interact with people from those places. And find something that helps you do that. I always go back to this. Pop culture is not a bad thing. You learn a lot from pop culture, right? And that's where you can kind of understand, oh, that's kind of, what the folks over there do, right? You can only learn so much from a book. So it's to see, okay, this is how they, this is the vocabulary that now that they use, right? Like, you have to do that. You have to just, find something you like, that you're interested in, and follow that. For example, my brother probably knows more slang in Cantonese than I do because he watches, different shows, right? And I'm like, what was that word you just used? And so you have to really, continue learning. Is very important.
Mm-hmm. I would say that's pretty much what I observed of you for the last 20 plus years, is that you're continuously learning. I know she said, like, don't just rely on books, but Alice, you're an avid reader.
Yes.
You read a lot,
Yes,
right? You
I do.
read on a lot of your spare time, and
Yes.
you write a lot. That's what I know about you too. And I would say the pop culture thing, if travel is not an option, especially these days, like, and it can be expensive, right? Alice watches a lot of shows. Like, when we go out for dinners, I don't watch a lot of shows, so I have to hear about what's going on, on TV these days from Alice, and then the latest book and the latest music. It's like, I'm just like, I don't know how you have all this time, but part of it is just how dedicated you are to learning, and you're just so curious.
I am very curious.
Yeah, you're very curious.
I am very curious about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Again, books is not a bad thing. I do love books. It's I think curiosity is a good thing. I love documentaries, actually. I love watching documentaries. I actually have it was a PBS documentary. I purposely purchased it so that I can watch that channel. But yes, definitely, I think, having a curious mind, having an open mind, is an asset for sure.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to summarize and then ask for your recap. But, you started, you immigrated to Hawaii, but you lived in two different places before that. And you arrived, you saw some differences. And even though there's Cantonese speakers, you also thought, oh, this is a little different, right? And then so you mentioned earlier you came to Manoa, and you wanted to find your roots.
Yes.
And education was one way of doing that, outside of what mom and dad taught you at home, right?
Yep.
And then at to study abroad opportunities, you went to China for a summer, and then you went to Japan for an academic year. And then eventually you had a few different careers. You interpreted for an athlete, professional athlete. And then you got into medical interpreting, which it sounds like really simple jumps, but all of that, since 2008, you've been a professional medical interpreter, and now you're in administration at the hospital. So could you recap some take-home points or pieces for us after reflecting on this career? I hope this talk today gave you the chance to reflect on your career in medical interpreting in San Francisco, following your Asian studies education.
Yeah, it has. Actually, coming home this time, I reflected a lot. And I think, a person's, success in their work is not just themselves, right? It's the people who have supported them, and believed in them, right? And also actually people who you may not have liked working with. It's actually people who actually motivate you, to do better. Sometimes, this person, it's so hard to work with them. But then you realize there's a reason for that. I need to, try to do something else so that I can work with this person, right? So it gives you the motivation to work, because at the end of the day, if you're at a workplace, you have to work with these people, right? So how do I do that? So they're also motivators too. Again, and anybody's career success is not just because of, yes, you have to work hard, but you also have a good support team, people who believed in you. And, I had great mentors. I had a good mentor when I first started medical interpreting. She was a nurse before, and a cancer survivor. And I think her motivation to become a medical interpreter herself was because she wanted to help more people. And she was a great mentor. And she was like a mom at work, a work mom. And, she taught me a lot of, things, not just about the interpreting piece, but also how to become professional and not be afraid to speak up. Because, when we first started as interpreters, you might be afraid to say anything to provider, right? You think, oh my gosh, this is the authority. Sometimes I still think that way. And you're afraid to speak up, but sometimes you do. You have to speak up. And don't be afraid to do that. And so, yeah, I think part of it is also knowing that you don't know everything when you first start, right? When you first start off. But also when you see the opportunity to make improvements, also speak up. I remember when I first started as a medical interpreter, we moved from one system, a very old, what is it called, electronic medical record system, to a newer one. And we all had to go through a training to learn the new one, okay? And there was a way to request interpreters through this new system. And how do they do it? They say, okay, so you make an appointment for the provider, and then you make an appointment you find the time slot that's with the interpreter, and you link them together. Oh, that sounds awesome, right? Great, we could do that. But what did they tell me in this class? Oh, even though it starts at 10 o'clock, put in the notes that the interpreter will arrive 15 minutes earlier. And as an interpreter, I'm like, that's not going to work. I'm going to be running late or leaving a previous appointment too early, right? Just to arrive 15 minutes earlier for this other provider. And so I spoke up. I told the instructor, this won't work for medical interpreters. This system, the way that you set it up, is not going to work. And I also, of course, went to my supervisor and let them know. And so this became an opportunity for me to improve that system. And they were willing to work with me and say, yes, I don't think it works either. So how do we make it work better? And so I was able to be a part of that team to show that, hey, we need to have a different process so that the interpreters aren't running late or leaving early just to attend a different appointment. So that was kind of my first way into improving the workflows, not just for me, but for my colleagues, right? And so, take those opportunities when you see there's a way to improve something. Come up with a plan too, not just say, hey, this is terrible. No, it's about, okay, if you think it's not good, what is your plan for it, right? It's not enough just to complain. You have to know how you want to resolve this, or know who to work with to support you to resolve it. So, and slowly through these improvements, little projects, I not only became every day I'm a medical interpreter, but then I realized there's other things that I could do to improve the way we do things. And the reason why I made this leap from a medical interpreter to, being part of the administration team is because, to be honest, I didn't want to leave medical interpreting, my everyday work, because I just loved interaction with patients and providers. But I also saw there was a need there's a lot more improvement things that can be done. And being an interpreter, I can see that perspective. And so I decided, if there's an opportunity, I will try to take that. And so I did. I made that leap to become a manager, so that, in the bigger picture, I can help more people improve the access to language. I don't regret it, but I do still miss interpreting every day. When I do have the opportunity to interpret, because all the other interpreters are, otherwise engaged, I love it so much, to go back to those clinics and help those patients. But also knowing that the current job that I do is to improve the overall access to language for our patients. And, being an interpreter, the struggles that your staff goes through and how to improve their work, to help them succeed. It's kind of like thinking, if I was an interpreter back then at the start, what would I have liked to see, and how can I make that possible for the current interpreters, especially the new one, right? Our new hires. How do I make their transition smoother, and knowing that they have a good support team in the department. So yeah.
Thank you, Alice. One more thing before I open up to the floor for questions is Alice says she subscribes to PBS or some paid version of it, but she was also in a PBS NewsHour herself. So she was in an interview in May 2023. When this Zoom is being recorded right now, and Haidar will clean it up and put it up online for a replay later. We can add the link to that with the YouTube caption in the I don't know what it's called, like the description area. And it was the AAPI Heritage Month, and they talked about critical need of medical interpreters in the US and language access, and Alice was featured.
Thank you.
So questions?
So as an interpreter, has there been a moment where it was hard to convey specific terms since you were in the medical field? Do you prepare for it ahead of time, or do you just try to figure it out on the spot?
That's a good question. First of all of us as interpreters, we tell ourselves we're not walking dictionaries, right? And preparation is very important. So of course you can prepare all you want, but sometimes it just doesn't go the way that you think, right? And so if there's a term you don't know as you're interpreting, you can pause the conversation, and the interpreter needs to pause and then turn to both the provider and says, can you clarify this term or explain it a different way? And you also have to tell the patient that you're stopping the conversation to clarify a term, because one of the golden rules in medical interpreting is that everything that is said in the room needs to be interpreted. So, you have to make sure the patient knows what you're asking about, and have the provider maybe explain the term a little bit more, because that's how you kind of develop that trust with both your patient and the provider, right? Again, because we're not walking dictionaries. But of course, if you have the chance to prepare, you should, right? As a staff interpreter, we can look up patient chart and look, okay, these are the medical terms they'll be using today for this particular visit. Maybe it's a family meeting, right? Or end of life. And you can prepare, right? You can say, okay, I know those terms. Most ideal is if you can get at least a minute or two with the care team before you walk into a room and say, hey, what are we going to talk about today? Because it's not just about terminology, but it's also about preparing yourself mentally to walk into whatever situation it is. Because if you think about it, doctors don't walk into a room without knowing what's going on with their patient, right? They have something prepared, right? They've read the chart, they know what's going on, and then they walk into a room and talk to a patient. But as interpreters, we don't always get a chance to look at, a chart. We go from one appointment to another, from the clinic to the hospital. And so we don't get that chance to prepare sometimes. So what do? We have to, again, speak up, right? And say, hey, can you at least give me like a 30-second rundown of what we're going to talk about? Because that helps you prepare your brain, right? What kind of terms you might need to use, but also mentally knowing, okay, this is going to be, a pretty heavy conversation today, right? So yeah, the good question. Yes, preparation is very important.
Yeah, so I was also going to add that Alice is here as part of this larger National Research Center, the Southeast Asia, Pacific Islands, and East Asia. So she did a workshop the last 2 days at Kapiolani Community College, where they have a community language interpreting program, right? And so she gave a workshop there for community interpreters and those who are interested, whether in the legal field or, medical. And here in Hawaii, it seems our interpreters are doing everything from court in one day to child welfare to the medical system. And we got to hear a lot about what UCSF is doing. It's really fascinating. I think it's quite a load on medical interpreters. In one day, their schedule, unlike in the medical field where you specialize and you could be an oncology floor, right? The medical interpreter gets called from oncology to peds to orthopedics to end of life care to delivering news to family. And it could be pediatrics too. So they're running around a lot, but they do have access to the electronic medical system. It's just maybe there's no time to look at a chart before you get there. Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on how you
get a job in medical interpreting, especially if you don't have a medical background? How do you get certified? Like, how do you get a job in that?
That's a very good question. Yes, we are medical interpreters. We're not doctors or nurses, right? So how do we do this? So there are medical interpreting programs, right? And they teach you all the skills that you need. But in my journey, it was learning medical terminology, right? You need to know your basics. In those classes, they teach you, the Latin prefixes, and you're like, oh, okay, this is what all these terms are. Because when you hear it, they all seem very foreign, right? When you go to the hospital, like, oh my gosh, even for English-speaking patients, they get lost too, right? And so, as a medical interpreter, learning medical terminology is very important, and also knowing what are the medical advances out there. You don't have to be a doctor, but you need to kind of get a sense of the new therapies, the new treatments, right? So first thing, you need to be fluent in 2 languages or more. And then the best is actually to go through a medical interpreter program, right? And then certification right now, there are actually 2 national certifications for medical interpreting. The reason to be certified is so that it shows a level of standard, right, and professionalism. So showing that wherever you go to work, that you have a certain level of skill set, right? Your ethics and your standards for medical interpreting. And how do you get a job? That's a good question. I think a lot of folks probably in Hawaii, they start as a freelance. Right? They work for an agency and do freelance work. There's also bigger agencies, like for us at UCSF, we partner with, we call them our language service providers. Usually they're either like a local agency for our in-person interpreters, and that's where actually a lot of our staff interpreters started off as agency interpreters. And then when we hire, when we're open to hire, right, posted jobs, they applied. Yeah. So that's one way, I suppose. And you can also, those other bigger agencies, they do in-person phone interpreting and also video interpreting. So there's different ways to get into interpreting. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what are the main languages that you work with at UCSF?
Good question. So our top languages is Spanish, Cantonese, Mandarin, and most recently is Vietnamese. It's one of the top ones. And then we also have Toishanese. Anybody heard of Toishanese? Yeah. Yay! So Toishanese is a dialect from China. It's very popular in San Francisco. A lot of the folks come from that area, from Toishan. And so a lot of the older generation, they speak Toishanese. So those are kind of our top 5. Then we have our top 10, which includes like Japanese, Arabic, Farsi, Dari, Korean. Sign language is definitely, there as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you guys provide the services in American Sign Language specifically, or with different like sign languages across Asia?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd personally be interested to hear kind of more about how you work with deaf patients to facilitate that communication between doctors and patients.
Sure, yeah. So we haven't had an opportunity to or have any requests for sign language from Asia, from countries in Asia. But we do have, so it's American Sign Language, like you mentioned. There's also something called BASL. Have you heard of that? Yeah. So it's actually, I think it's like what is it called? Black American Sign Language, right? So that's different too. So with us, we actually have a vendor that we work with to provide sign language. They also provide tactile interpreters as well, and also deaf interpreters too. And they also have real captioning. So real captioning is really just like, you know, how we have captions nowadays, but it's real time. So someone is typing it out. And then at UCSF, we also, besides in-person sign language interpreters that you can request, we also have it on the iPad. So the iPad, we recommend that it be the 12.9-inch screens because they're bigger and they have better speakers. And also when you provide video for sign language, you have to make sure that the bandwidth is high enough because it's not meaningful access if it freezes or you can't hear the audio, right? Especially for sign language, if it freezes, then the patient's missing a lot of what the interpreter is signing. So we have to make sure those are functioning well in order to provide meaningful access.
Thank you.
Alice, I do have a question. How many is in the team of UCSF interpreters and translators?
In our team? So we have 43 interpreters. 6 of them are Chinese. We call them Chinese interpreters because they speak both Cantonese and Mandarin. And we have one Chinese interpreter actually speaks Vietnamese as well. And we have a second Chinese interpreter who speaks Cantonese. So they're polyglots. But mostly and all the other interpreters are Spanish interpreters. So Spanish definitely is our biggest population, Spanish-speaking patients. Our hospital is actually we have many campuses. So the 43 interpreters are in San Francisco and also Oakland. So we have Benioff Children's Hospital in Oakland. And so half of our Spanish interpreters are in San Francisco and the other half is in Oakland.
Could you just like maybe briefly talk us through what a day would look like as a medical interpreter? Like how many appointments are you going to? I'm sure it varies.
Yeah.
But like what would a general average day be like?
Oh, okay. So the interpreter, I think earlier I mentioned we have a kind of like an Uber system, right? And so they sign on to their account and they can see all the appointments for the day. And so they accept the appointments. And so, like you mentioned, it depends on, how long these appointments are. Sometimes they're just 20 minutes. Sometimes they're an hour. Sometimes they're 2 hours, right? And the ones on the queue are kind of pre-scheduled. So probably, requested like a few days ago or a week ago, or sometimes even a month ago. But we also have appointments that come in on the day of, and it goes into the queue as well. It's chronological order. So our interpreters, our staff interpreters, they go to in-person appointments. They also do video. Video means, like I said, there's an iPad, right? And also they do telehealth, which is on Zoom. So they're kept quite busy. So I think on average they do probably about 10 to 12 a day. Yeah. Again, the length, right? Sometimes they're short, sometimes they're long. So it's about that long, and they are all 8 to 5 pretty much. Yeah. So it's a long day. And so especially sometimes when they interpret for a patient in the inpatient side, where maybe it's a patient that's been there for a long time, and all the interpreters have worked with this patient, and unfortunately they pass away. And, we also provide our interpreters with kind of like a debrief session, just to make sure they're okay, because it's very emotional, right? And so at UCSF we have chaplains, right? Non-denominational chaplains. And so they come to assist us with our interpreters and kind of, talk through the stresses that they have. Because, as a medical interpreter, your mental health and your well-being is very important because you take on a lot. You hear a lot. You may not think about it when you're interpreting, but when you leave that room, it takes over. It really does. It can be a very taxing emotionally and physically. And so it's important for interpreters to take care of themselves, to have good self-care. Yeah.
So like considering you said how it's like an Uber, like an Uber system. So what happens if like a particular job runs too long and you have like one coming up like in the moment?
Good question. So we have a rule. Our rule is the appointment you're at is the most important. So you usually only accept one job at a time because you have other coworkers, right? And then in the system that we have, you can actually, let's say you accepted two thinking I'm good, right? I can take them both. You could actually put the second one back into the main queue so your colleagues can pick it up. Yeah. Any other question?
Yeah. So language, I think, is inherently like attached to culture, and there's different sensitivities and ways to express yourself in different cultures and languages. I assume, like, as an interpreter, part of your like ethics is to like try to translate things as truthfully and like literally like as they're being like being said in the moment. But if you're delivering, for example, like very like sensitive like news, like someone's about to like pass away, or like if it's just like a really like emotionally intense situation, would you ever kind of like take your own like liberty of like if you're speaking in like Cantonese and you realize like your patient is like Cantonese, like trying to like rephrase what the like let's say the doctor is saying to be more sensitive to like Chinese culture? I don't know if I'm trying like if you I'm articulating my question well. But yeah, like at what point do you kind of take liberty or like your own interpretation of like the translation in order to be sensitive to the culture of that person, as opposed to like literally translating things from like English or like does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I thank you. Thank you for that question. So part of our standard ethics is cultural awareness, and also part of interpreting is it has to be accurate. You can't add, omit, or change anything. But within that, though, there's never going to be always one-to-one, right? Because languages are different, right? And so what you're actually interpreting is the same content, right? In the same context, the same tone, the same register. And so, so you, as an interpreter, you don't take any liberties. You can advocate, but you do it very, kind of seldom, and you have to have very good discretion when you use it. So if you see that there's a cultural component, right, that's coming up, and first for me though, the interpreter usually just kind of goes with what the doctor's saying, and you interpret, right, and it's part of what we call communication management. You have to listen to the flow of that communication. That's why I said listening skills is so important, and comprehension. Because if you see that, hey, this conversation isn't going the way that the doctor is trying to explain it, and the patient is not getting it, then you have to, that's when you interject, and so the interpreter needs to pause the conversation. There needs to be some clarification. And so again, you have to tell both parties what you're asking, why you stopped the conversation, and then you clarify. Okay, you talk to the doctor. It seems like there's something that is not, the patient's not understanding. Is there another way that you can explain this, right? So it's up to the doctor to explain what the patient needs to know. Now, if there's a cultural component, you could definitely share that too, right? But before you share that cultural component, let that conversation flow as unless it's very like specific and let that conversation goes the way it does. And then why? Because culture, you can't generalize it, right? Specific regions maybe have a different culture, right? And I don't know everything about Chinese culture, right? So you can't always generalize it, right? You have to just let it flow, and then realize, oh, you know what? There is a component in here that I need to mention, or else this conversation is not going to go well. But there are things that in general that, yes, for example, in Chinese culture, the word death is very sensitive. And so, that's when it's an end of life conversation, and you have the time to let the provider know, hey, the word death is very sensitive, especially for older folks. Can you find a way to express it in so that they know what's going on, yet not use that word. So you can have a conversation with the provider beforehand. And nowadays, because we worked with providers for so long, some of them are quite knowledgeable that know, okay, when we talk about this with this patient, we need to be culturally sensitive of how we pose what we're asking. Right? And you know what? In Chinese, there is no dying. There's no ing. It's either you're alive or you're not. Right, but a lot of providers, the patient is actively dying. What is that? How do we, And so those are things we tell the doctor beforehand and say, you know what, in our language, we don't have this ing, this dying. It's either you're alive or you're not. And so then it's up to the doctor to think, okay, let's pose it in a different way, right? Because at the end of the day, we're not doctors. Right? We're not nurses, we're medical interpreters. And so the onus is on the provider to explain it the way that they see fit and for us to interpret what they're saying. I hope that helped.
It did, yeah, thank you.
Right at 1:30, one last question.
What's your superpower?
Oh! So, thank you for bringing that up. My superpower is that I'm a third culture kid. Anybody heard of that? Yes, right? And what does that mean? I kind of talked about earlier and not know where I fit, right? Because I have a culture at home that is, a Chinese culture, and then I have this other culture's American or Hawaii culture. And how do I marry those two? It's like, when I go back to Hong Kong, they're like, Alice is from overseas. She doesn't know anything about, anything from Hong Kong or our cultural traditions, right? And that's not true. But you feel that you're a sense of an outsider, even from your own country or your own home. And when you hear, you're like, I know about the American culture, but I'm not actually born here. So I feel like there's something missing all the time. So you're in that middle place where you're like, I'm in between worlds, right? That's what a third culture kid is. But you know what? As a medical interpreter, that is my superpower. Knowing how to navigate between these two cultures is an asset. It's a total asset. And also being comfortable in these two cultures, right? And also knowing, as a medical interpreter, the healthcare culture too. Right? Because a lot of patients who come from other countries, they don't understand the American health culture. How do you navigate through this? And so knowing it helps. It can help your patient to work through these spaces. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Well, thank you, Alice, for your time, and everyone for all your attention and all your questions. Really great questions. Thank you.